Good day, strategy gamers, and welcome back to episode 4 of our Let's Play series, Downfall Conquest of the Third Reich by GMT Games. This episode we're going to be starting with the OKH turn. As you can see, they're lowest on the initiative track, and we'll probably get in a turn for the OKW faction as well. So hoping to get 2 factions turns in this one episode so we can keep speeding along through the Let's Play. Now that we see what the the initiative track looks like, let's hop on over to the action track so we can consider exactly which orders are available to us. So for the OKH faction, there's actually a number of orders available to choose from. The first and probably priority, just in terms of ranking on the track, is the deploy and attack order. This would be for armor and motorized units, so we would be allowed to move the qualified units 3 movement points, and then we would also be able to conduct an attack worth 2. So that's worthy of consideration. There's also a command failure. This is double-sided for OKH and OKW factions. With this, we would roll a single die to try to push the OKW faction marker along the initiative track by that number of spaces. And what's intriguing about that is it could actually allow us to get in a little bit of a double turn where we get to go again before the OKW faction gets to have their turn. Empty space, which we'll draw for momentarily. Another command failure, so there's actually 2. We wouldn't be able to use both, but there are 2 on the track. And then the mechanized reinforcement counter, again, that's a double-sided OKH, OKW one. So the intriguing thing there is, there's temptation to grab that before the OKW faction does, allowing them to reinforce, for example, their units in North Africa. That'd be pretty valuable to them. We also have in our planning box for OKH a 4 deploy movement order for looks like airborne infantry and armor. So that's pretty robust as well. Let's go ahead and draw from the coffee mug here a new order. We drew a recruit for the Soviets. We will move all the current ones down to fill in that gap, and then the new drawn order will go on the top of the action track. Now that we've seen what's available on the action track, let's shift our attention back to the East Front to look at the position that we're in and where we probably have a priority for our order. So when we look at the East Front, we see that the Soviet player was able to use a deploy order to really reform a front line that is in contact with our own. So we can probably expect that in the next sequence with the Soviet player, if a command is available, if an order is available to them that allows them to conduct combat, I think there's a decent chance that they would leverage that order. So with that in mind, really a priority that I see for the OKH player was the 1st Panzer. And that is because right now, if we have a supply check, it would be out of supply. This also means that we're not able to reinforce this unit, and we're not able to actually move because these zone of control hex spines from the neighboring Soviet forces are actually preventing us from moving. So this is a very precarious position that we find ourselves in with that unit. With that, there's then some appeal to the deploy and attack order. Now, unfortunately, we would not be able to actually retreat the 1st Panzer if we were successful in our attack, but at the very least, we may be able to push back that armored unit that is sitting north of the 1st Panzer, and then perhaps on a following turn, try to retreat the 1st Panzer back to be in supply. I should actually point out, if we retreat the Soviet unit, very likely we find ourselves in a position where the first Panzer is actually back in supply because the enemy zone of control there is no longer present. So that has great appeal. One of the downsides, though, with that particular order, and it is the lowest on the action track, so we won't have any penalties for choosing it, is just the initiative cost. The initiative cost for that order is 10, which at this stage, if we remember what the initiative track looked like, all the factions are within a couple of initiative points of each other, so it could leave us then waiting a little bit to get another turn. So that's a consideration. Now, there is also a command failure order that's available. That has an initiative cost of 2. If we used that order and paid the penalty, brings the total cost to 3, we would find ourselves below the Western Allies on the initiative track, but ahead of OKW. And as long as we roll more than a 1, I believe, more than a 1, we would then get to actually have another turn after that. So we would push back the OKW faction by an additional turn. That's pretty appealing. And then, of course, there's the mechanized order. Reasons to take that would be, maybe we say, 1st Panzer, you're in a really tough spot and there's nothing we can do for you right now. We'll probably lose you, but we need you to just sit tight. And then we could use the mechanized order to perhaps reinforce some units that we have here along the front line. So it's kind of a mixed bag of options available to us. There's also the movement, the redeploy order that's available. Without any attack, though, I think it has a little bit less of a value because we wouldn't be able to move the 1st Panzer. We'd be able to move other units on the front, maybe to a more advantageous position, but it wouldn't be quite as impactful as getting the 1st Panzer a little more free. I think what we're going to do is use the command failure order, and we will roll a die to see how far we actually advance the OKW track. So let me just place that here in our OKH orders track. I'm then going to move up 3 spaces on the initiative track, and we will roll 1 die to see how far the OKW marker is going to move. I'm hoping for more than a 1 here. It's a 5. So the OKW marker is now leading the pack, if you will, which means they have to wait the longest for their next turn. As a consequence of that, it actually now begins a new action round for us, the OKH player, to once more be able to take our turn. So I'm going to reposition back over to the action track just to see what we draw and fill in there for that empty space, because maybe there's something new and exciting, and then we'll carry on. So let us now move down the orders to draw a new one. Hopefully it is not a Soviet attack order. It is material shortages. So material shortages, again, is another OKH and OKW available command. All right. I don't think that's something that we're going to take, especially with an additional 3 initiative cost. That seems pretty high and for not too much gain given our present situation. So I think we will go ahead and elect to pay the cost of this 3 deploy and 2 attack marker, which is a total cost of 10. So we'll hop over to the initiative track just to see where everything sits after that decision. So with that, we are currently at 27. We're going to go all the way up to 37 on the track, and we did pass the event marker. So this means we have a pending event that will resolve at the end of this action round. I made a slight error there. I forgot to acknowledge that we were actually in the same space as the current weather marker. So what we're going to do is actually roll 2 dice to see how far the weather marker moves. So let's get some dice in frame here. All right. That's a pretty high number, 8, but it can only go as high as the OKW marker. So we will move it up to that spot. Now we'll hop over to the east front to resolve our redeploy and attack order. So just a reminder, because this is something that I think is pretty easy to get tripped up on when you're going quickly. Our order does list redeploy first, then attack. On some symbols, it's the opposite of that where it lists attack first. You must follow the order in that order of operations. So we must move before attacking, whereas other orders will have the opposite where you must attack before moving. So we get 3 movement points for all motorized and armored units. And I think what we'll do is we'll just work our way south to north like we did last time and consider any possible moves that we want to make. Now the 17th Infantry here is not a qualifying unit. The 1st Panzer, due to enemy zones of control, is unable to move. However, the 4th Panzer is a very good candidate here for us to maybe reposition given the current circumstances. It finds itself rather outnumbered and likely a victim of counterattack next turn by the Soviets that they have. We're unable to retreat into this hex here, directly at least, but we would be able to move into this hex over here. So crossing the river adds 1 to our movement point, so it costs 2 to move into this hex. I think what we might actually do is take the 4th Panzer, retreat it across the river, and then we are going to elect to move it over here, as it will now be able to help with the 1st Panzer's attack against this Soviet armored unit. I think it puts the 4th Panzer in a little bit of a risky position because now, if this attack fails, we're diverting more forces to the south of the front where there's 2 problems. One, I think it's easier for them to get cut off from supply. But secondly, I think we also run the risk that we've diverted too much attention to the south of the front and that it opens up a gap for the Soviets to push into Ukraine more directly. So it's a risk, but I think it's worth it to try to save the 1st Panzer here. As we continue looking up, I don't think in this hex we have any armor. Nope, just a garrison unit. And that is Rostov, just as a reminder. We do have that air unit there. Looking over here, we do have an armor unit, and this is next to Kursk, just to remind ourselves. That's a bit of an interesting one. We could pull back this unit, but that then leaves our infantry quite isolated. So I think we may leave that right where it is. Looking further along the line, we have the 3rd Panzer up here. This is by Veliky Lukai, I think. Oh, my goodness. Yes, it is. Now, again, we could pull back there, but we have the defensive bonus from being in a city. And if we pull back, I think we start to leave maybe this infantry unit a little bit more vulnerable as well. So I think we will leave the 3rd Panzer where it is in Veliky Lukai. And further north of that, there's no more armor or motorized units. We will now move on to the attacks, and we have 2 attacks that we're able to conduct with this order as long as they are met or qualified by, a armored unit or a motorized unit. So again, the first priority reason that we chose this order, I think we will attack with the 1st Panzer against this Soviet armored unit, and we will have the 4th Panzer, as mentioned, helping in a flanking position. So with that done, we now move on to action cards. And let us consider what the the Axis player has, the OKH player. We still only have the light artillery card, which is not applicable as there are no fortress units or minor faction units available. And that's the only OKH action card that we have in our hand. Now, when we consider the defending player for action cards or HQ cards of any kind, we do have the North Caucasus Front available. However, this is if we were attacking, so we're not able to actually use this card. There's partisan activity, and this is applicable if the country has any partisans in it, which it does not. And then lastly, and I think this one we may actually leverage, we have Tank Corps. And this is combat with a Soviet unit. We get a dice roll modifier in snow or fair weather. We are currently in snow, so we get a +1 dice roll modifier. I think we're actually going to play that card, so I'm just going to lay that flat here as a reminder as we go through the different calculations. I'm also going to make a slight adjustment here to the camera angle so we can get the DRM and column track in view. All right, now we will go on to actually look at the column modifiers. So we begin with the strength of our attacking unit, which is 3. Now we do have one flanking attacker helping us, so that brings us up to a 4 in total. We do have a German armored unit, and that's a +2 to 6. We have more elite badges, so that is another +1. And we have at least one German combat unit, which is bringing us to a +8. And now we must consider the defender's strength modifiers. So first, the defender has a strength of 2, so we move the column marker back down to a 6. We do not have any conscription badges. I do not believe we are in a city or any particular type of terrain. Nope, it's just clear terrain, no city. Not crossing a river or anything like that. I mean, that's the entirety of the strength modifier. So it's not looking too good from that perspective. We're at a +6 in terms of column shift. Now we'll take a look at the dice roll modifiers. For action cards, the defender played an action card, and they get a DRM value of -1 from that. We do not have any event roll bonuses. We previously did, but we no longer do. The weather is snow, so for the attacker that's a further -2, so we're up to a -3 DRM. Column's looking great for the attacker, but the DRM is not. Air superiority is actually neutralized because we have one air marker and the Soviets have one air marker within range. Soviets have a second air marker, however it's north of Stalingrad and out of range for this particular engagement. And we are not yet isolated because we've not yet had a supply check. So that brings us to the end of the DRM and column calculations. So we are going to be on a column +6 with a -3 dice roll modifier. So we're probably going to be okay, but let's roll some dice and just see where we land. Not, not the greatest. So that's a 7, which goes down to a 4 on the +6 table, brings us to a 1, 3. So for the attacker, we must then take a strength loss. We've already flipped to our non-armored side, so we just take the strength loss. And the Soviets now have to resolve 3 in terms of loss steps. And up to half of those can be retreat. So we will retreat 2 hexes, and then we will take a 1 strength loss. Any other combination, and we would have to actually get rid of the unit. It would be lost, and that's not ideal in this game because they're in the dead pile once that happens. So where do we want to retreat to as the Soviet player is really kind of the question. It has to be away from the attacker in that origin. I think this hex right here, which is Kolinivko, I didn't do too well with that, I don't think. We'll move up there, so that'd be 1, 2, and we will then also reduce to a strength 1 when we move up there. Now, for our German unit, we are actually able to advance after combat. So I am going to move the 1st Panzer up, so that way it's no longer neighboring those Soviet units. And hopefully we can make a great escape now with the 4th Panzer and the 1st Panzer back towards Stalino, Melitopol, etc. as we continue our retreat on the East Front. Pretty happy with how that ended. It would have been nice not to have taken that strength hit. That dice roll modifier really did hurt us, and it was, I mean, statistically a very average roll with a 7, so we can't complain about that too much. But the dice roll modifier ultimately was what hurt us a little bit, but that's why we racked up the column shifts from strength, and I'm glad we brought the 4th Panzer over. Had we not done so, just out of curiosity to take a look at that, so we would have lost 1 for the flanking, and then we would have lost 2 for the German armored unit. Oh. Nope. I made a mistake there. The German armored unit is just in fair weather, but we are in snow. So we do actually need to recalculate that. So we would actually be at a column +4 with a 7 less 3 is 4. So we're at a column 4, dice roll 4. It still results in us taking 1 loss and the defender having to retreat. So the defender would have retreated just 1 space instead of 2. So let's put them right back here into this hex. So instead of retreating up here to the city, we retreated just 1 space. So it didn't impact it too much, but I'm glad I caught that. So per German armored unit in fair, not snow. Snow is not qualifying. But we would have had 1 armored unit in snow. So I missed that. So actually, that's a column shift 5 on a 4 is no loss. No loss to us. So let me just recalculate that real quick. All right, so sorry for that mix-up. I had read the armored unit in fair, which I had given to us as a +2, when in fact it should have been a +1 for an armored unit in snow. This actually brings us to a column shift +5. Our 7 reduced by the DRM is a 4. So that brings us to 0, 2, G. Now, the G stands for on turns 1 through 6, reduce the defender hits by 1 if all are German. All the defenders were Soviets, so that is not applicable. So the Soviet retreat and strength loss is valid as we had conducted it. However, the 1st Panzer actually regains a strength. So it is back up to the original strength of 3. We did not need to actually lose a strength step. Apologies for that mix-up, but it's always very important to be thorough as you go through that combat resolution player aid. Again, my credits to the designers and developers. It is a very nice player aid to go through. I just got a little caught up there in the hustle bustle of breaking the first panzer out of that encirclement. With that now resolved, I think what we want to do is actually look if there's any other opportunity for us to conduct an attack as a counteroffensive against the enemy. So I'm just going to refocus the camera a little bit and we'll take a look to see what opportunities might exist. When we look at the rest of the front, we have 2 armor units that would be eligible to conduct an attack. We have the 2nd Panzer right here, and then we have the 3rd Panzer up in Veliki Lukai. Now, the 2nd Panzer is a bit of a linchpin in holding this big wave from, or this door from pivoting, swinging right into Ukraine. It's kind of right at that hinge point. And it occupies great terrain. And if we did an attack, we would be attacking either of these units in Orel or in Bryansk, and that gives the defender a +1 strength for being in a city, which isn't great, because that effectively makes them strength 3 units. When we look up here, east of Smolensk, there's no city that this unit's occupying, so we get an extra column, theoretically, right, because we have strength 3, they have strength 2, but they don't have any defender, terrain, or city modifiers helping them out. There is also, I suppose, this shock unit here not occupying a city, but I think we'd want to leverage the flanking unit. Now, I think what we'll probably do is attack with the 3rd Panzer in the north here. And the reason for that being that it feels a little risky. I'd hate to lose the 2nd Panzer either a step, well, we'd be flipping it to its non-armor side, which would not be great. And it really weakens our defense right in the center of our line. If this attack goes poorly, it really isn't going to shift or create an opening for the Soviets to be able to punch through into Ostland. It stays still relatively strong, that front line. There's not a huge concentration of Soviet forces there to be worried about. If we're successful in the attack, however, it further reduces the strength in the north of the Soviets, causing them to have to do more reinforcement and mechanized orders in the north to try to recover their strength there, and allows us to be less worried about reinforcing the north and can instead focus our attention in the south. So it feels a little bit like a win-win situation there, or at least a win-draw situation. So let's attack with the 3rd Panzer just east of Smolensk there. I'm just going to again reposition so that way we can see the combat column and dice roll modifier track. I need all of you to keep me honest on that track because clearly I've been going through it too fast. So right now we're attacking just on the top of the screen here. We'll start with the column, well, excuse me, actually we'll start with declaring. So the 3rd Panzer is attacking here and this unit is flanking in support. In terms of action cards, there's no eligible cards in either the Soviet or the OKH hand, so we're going to skip over that step. But we can move right along to the combat strength. So the 3rd Panzer is a strength of 3. It has 1 flanking unit helping it, which brings this to a 4. We do have 1 armored unit that is supporting, but it's in snow, so it's only a +1 because of the weather. We have 1 elite badge. They have none, so we get a +1 modifier for that. And we also have a German combat unit, which is a further +1. So we're up to a 7 there. Now we go through for the defender and their strength modifiers. They have a strength of 2. And that's really all that she wrote. There's no terrain modifiers. They have no conscription or elite badges. There's no armor, etc., etc. So we know our column shift is going to be a +5. Now for our dice roll modifiers, there were no cards that were used. There's no events. The weather is snow, so that is a -2 for us, the attacker. And there's no air superiority, as there are no air units in the north that are currently active. No one is isolated. And I believe that brings us to our final modifier. So we have a +5 column with a -2 DRM. Let's go ahead and get some dice in here and we will roll. So that is a 7 brought down to a 5 because of the DRM. So let's look at the +5 track. At a 5 is a 0-2. So that is a great result for us. We take no losses and our opponent takes 2. I want to quickly call out while we're looking at this, the +4 column, I think is where we would have ended up if we had attacked in the south, near Orel or Bryansk, because they were in a city, they would have gotten an additional column shift. So we probably would have then lost our armor step as a result there. But nope, we have a 0-2, which is a great result for us. Let's go ahead and satisfy that. So the defender is going to retreat 1 and take a strength loss of 1. We're going to keep it pretty simple due to the zone of controls and just go back into Smolensk, and we are now a 1 strength unit. We have the option for the 3rd Panzer to advance, or the flanking unit. I'm not going to, however, because moving into this hex just presents the Soviets with an opportunity to counterattack without using a redeploy marker and having 2 flanking units in the attack. So we're going to sit tight right where we are. With all of that said and done, we've used up our 2 attacks, we've done our redeploy orders as the OKH faction. We did pass the event marker on the initiative track, so let's now go ahead and satisfy the event resolution for the turn, and then we'll close out the episode. All right, for our event turn, we're going to start by taking the current event and moving it over to the discard pile. Got the OKH marker there just as a reminder. Strategic impact now moves to the current event. We have to remove any air units to reflect the new total. So there should be one Western ally and 1 OKH on the board. So that means I have to remove the 2 Soviet air markers that are currently on the East Front, and we're compliant with that now. We then resolve the current event. So this one's strategic impact. This is looking at the 3 strategic warfare boxes. And we're going to roll 1 dice for the OKH and OKW player. So I'm going to get 2 colored dice here. And pretty much there's a DRM for which of the strategic warfare tracks they have an advantage in. So at present, the Western Allies have the advantage in 1 strategic warfare track, and the OKW faction has the advantage in 2 of the strategic warfare tracks. So there's a +2 DRM for the OKW player, and a +1 DRM for the Western Allies. We'll just call that, we'll add that to the 2 totals. Western Allies will be green, OKW will be red. Okay, so that's something. So the OKW 4 turns into a 6, the Western Ally 1 turns into a 2. The difference between the 2, which is 4, is now the initiative cost that the Western Allies have to pay. So that's really tough. So the Western Allies were going to be the next faction to take their turn. They are now, however, 4 spots higher up on the track. So I've got that resolved. Move the dice out of the way here. Now what we have to do is look at the next card in the draw pile. And just so we can get a sneak peek at what's coming, it's Soviet Reserves. So it has some type of condition here for turn 7 or 8, which we are not on, so we're going to ignore that. And when this becomes active, the Soviets are going to get reinforcements for 4 infantry, and no more than 1 step can be assigned to shock units. That's a pretty powerful card for the Soviet player. Now, at the same time, we're going to draw an action card for the Soviets and put it into their hand as a result of the Soviet card icon on that new event. The card is Strategic Movement. Play at the start of any Soviet order. So we can take 1 Soviet unit any distance using only sea areas and friendly rail lines. Unit can't enter Izak during the move, it may leave. The move may be subject to naval interception, and it can't be moved again in this order. So that's a pretty powerful kind of redeploy anywhere you want on the East Front card. That'll probably be handy as we look at the concentration of forces between the north and south halves of the Eastern Front. There are no new air units presented on the draw pile card, so we're not going to change anything there. We flip the initiative marker back over to its initiative side, not its event pending side, and that ends the event procedure and the end of the action round for the OKH player. So we didn't actually get to play as the OKW player because we used command failure, but we did get in kind of 2 action phases with the OKH player. So hoping we're picking up the pace just a little here for everyone. You probably noticed we took a slight change in direction in the cameras. Angles, again, I'm just experimenting right now. I'm not settled on one view or the other. Really welcome any of your feedback to see which approach you appreciate most. Kind of the options right now are, episodes 1 and 2, where it was top-down, very high-level strategic view of the entire board, but I assume it was probably harder to follow along with some of the text and the counters. The last episode was a little bit of a hybrid, where we had a higher strategic view, but then zoomed in occasionally. And then in this particular episode, you saw we moved around in more granular detail to different parts of the map and board as we completed the turn. So please, if you have a preference between those kind of 3 options, let me know what it may be, and we'll try to adjust to make the viewing experience as good as possible. Should you have any questions, or please, I truly welcome this, anything you saw that I did incorrectly through the game mechanics, please leave it in the comments section below. Always appreciate your engagement. And as always, strategy gamers, hoping you have yourselves an excellent day. Bye now.